Seats, please. The next item on the order paper is a motion on a Lough Neagh rescue plan. I'll ask the clerk to read the motion.
That this Assembly recognises the vital importance of Lough Neagh to our environment, ecology and drinking water supply, further recognises its importance to tourism, fishing and leisure activities in local communities surrounding the lough, notes with grave concern the ecological damage caused by the blue-green algae bloom last summer that choked the lough and spread throughout our waterways and beaches, calls for a cross-departmental body to be set up to address the immediate issues facing Lough Neagh, and further calls on the Executive to put in place a new management structure and plan to include input from communities and organisations with an interest in the welfare of the lough, so that it can be managed, protected and promoted in the interest of all.
Thank you. I call Philip McGuigan to move the motion. Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind. As an amendment has been selected and published in the marshal list, the Business Committee has agreed that 15 minutes will be added to the total time for debate. Please open the debate on the motion, Mr. McGuigan.
Count Collier, and I would just like to begin by welcoming the Minister to the debate and want to congratulate Minister Muir to his appointment as the new DAERA Minister, not just in taking up that role, but in creating his own bit of positive history. And I actually had a memory came up on my Facebook from 4 years ago. It was our inaugural run together, the MLA running group at Stormont that lasted, I think, maybe one run. It's interesting to note in the intervening 4 years, the Minister's carved out a very successful political career and as a Minister, and I have become an accomplished cyclist. But anyway, 2 weeks ago we did have the world's media here in the north, and they were here to cover a good news, positive story around the resumption of the Executive and the Assembly, and not to mention the historic nature of Michelle O'Neill becoming the North's First Minister. But we're all aware of the topic of discussion, and we're aware that during last summer, that same media, local and further afield, were attracted here to the north by a much less positive story. And that was of the ecological disaster that was playing out in stark reality in front of our eyes on Lough Neagh with the toxic bloom of blue-green algae. And the Minister and his ministerial colleagues will have entered their departments, I'm sure, with an overflowing entree. But the work of saving Lough Neagh and repairing the damage to its ecology and environment and that of its tributaries and surrounding land must be a top priority for the Executive in the time ahead. We need to see decisive action. The public want to see decisive action. And as our motion states, Lough Neagh, the largest freshwater lough in Ireland, is vitally important to our environment, our ecology, our public health, supplying as it does 40% of the North's drinking water. It plays an important role in local tourism, it's vital for the local fishing industry, and it is important to leisure activities, especially for the local communities surrounding the lough. And what are we asking for in our motion today? When this ecological catastrophe was playing out, as I said, in front of our own eyes during the summer months last year, we didn't have an Assembly, we didn't have an Executive, and therefore we didn't have ministers taking decisions. Civil servants were doing their best, but were constrained by the decisions that they could take, so we're obviously in a different scenario now. What we want to see is an executive agreement in the formation of a cross-departmental structure to be put in place to deal with the crisis in Lough Neagh, short, medium and long term. The issues affecting the lough are cross-cutting. Some will lie within DAERA, others will lie within DFI, others within the Department for Communities and other government departments. And obviously, NI Water, the NI Environment Agency, some councils will need to be represented, as well as representation from NGOs and local community groups, fishermen, Lough Neagh Partnership and other stakeholders, as the Alliance Amendment states, and which we will be supporting today. And despite the nature of this structure being cross-departmental, we do believe that one Executive Minister needs to be responsible and therefore accountable for its work. With public health, as well as both economic and environmental sustainability, now major concerns of the Lough, we cannot afford to be unclear when it comes to responsibility and accountability. And whatever final model is hopefully agreed by the Executive, this cross-departmental body must provide greater coordination and focus to dealing with the issues of pollution, of climate change, of invasive zebra mussels, of the flow of phosphorus and nitrogen into our rivers and loch from agricultural sources, from septic tanks and wastewater. Dealing with and solving these issues and others requires an agreed management plan and strategy for the loch so that it can be managed, protected and promoted. So we want to see also an agreed management plan and structure put in place, again with the help of key stakeholders and those surrounding Lough Neagh. The issue of resources are quite rightly a key focus for the new Executive, and what we're asking for is that the Executive must ensure that a rescue package and plan for Lough Neagh is properly resourced, both in terms of a financial recovery package, but also in terms of necessary personnel within departments to take agreed actions forward. And finally, Collier, whilst it is not contained within the motion, Sinn Féin's long-held position is that Lough Neagh must be brought into public ownership. We would like to seek and see consensus within the Executive to begin exploring options for bringing the loch into public ownership as soon as possible. I think this would have massive public support and agreement throughout the North. We can no longer be expected to own the problems of the loch, but not the loch itself.
Thank you. I call John Blair to move the amendment.
Beg to move the amendment, Mr. Speaker, standing in my name.
Thank you. You will have 10 minutes to propose and 5 minutes to wind, and all other speakers will have 5 minutes. Please open the debate on the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I rise again to support the motion and also, of course, the amendment that I have put forward with colleagues to that motion. Mr. Speaker, I share with others the frustration at the incredible delay in progressing meaningful action to tackle our Lough Neagh crisis. Whilst this Assembly remained collapsed over the summer last year, the largest freshwater lake in these islands and a vital strategic asset for biodiversity, tourism, recreation, fishing, culture and drinking water experienced algal blooms at a rate never before witnessed on these islands. As if we haven't already had enough warnings in recent times on the state of our ecosystems and the associated threat to nature, then the Lough Neagh ecological crisis most certainly serves as notice that we must do things differently and do better. All policies and all practices which have led to this devastating situation should be on the table for review as an absolute urgency. When the blue-green algae issue was at its worst over the summer, I sponsored an event led by, I should say, Lough Neagh Partnership upstairs in this building. Some of you in the chamber today joined us, and I'm sure you'd all agree that there was a tangible sense of anger on that occasion, and frustration as well in the room, at the limits of what could be done at that time without a minister in place. I'm glad, Mr. Speaker, that we can now, in a restored Assembly, get on with trying to tackle the many issues we face at Lough Neagh. Just last week, after only a few days in office, the new Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs Minister was on a boat in the middle of the loch, seeing firsthand the work that needs to be done. It is reassuring to hear the Minister saying that the Lough Neagh crisis will remain high on his and the Department's agenda going forward. But we must, Mr. Speaker, be under no illusion. The restoration of the Assembly will not and cannot lead to a quick fix solution. This valuable natural asset can be saved, but it will take a very concentrated and coordinated effort by ourselves as elected representatives and various government departments and agencies over a long period. There is damage done over a long number of years to be put right. If you'll allow me, Mr. Speaker, to use the opportunity to highlight some of the work I have done with colleagues to address the issue in the long term, I'll take a moment to do that. My colleague, Shamil Holland, deserves a particular mention for her work on this. Our 5-point plan for Lough Neagh clearly details what actions need to be taken now. The first being the establishment of an independent environmental protection agency, a long-standing policy of the Alliance Party. This new body would have the authority to oversee and enforce environmental laws, with powers beyond DERA, NIEA and also the OEP. Our plan for Lough Neagh also details increasing fines and penalties for polluters, and this is a must. The fact is that it will take 20 years at least for the phosphorus sediment in the bed of the lough to rectify itself naturally, or even begin to. But we will never achieve this if we continue to pump the same substances into the lough at the same rate that they're being pumped into the lough at this time. It is clear beyond doubt that the bacterium in the lough is due to nutrient overload. The figures are out there. About 64% resulting from farming practices, 24% from water treatment and sewage, and 12% from septic tanks. Therefore, we must look seriously at it. Yes, I'll give way.
Can the member just maybe give some clarity regarding those figures, as in how those figures were deprived, the 64% and the 20 and the 12, how those figures are came about?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to respond on that and confirm that those are not my figures but the figures of the Department as presented to the cross-party updates that have been given on Lough Neagh. I'm assuming I don't have all of the contributors in front of me listed, but I'm assuming that, for example, AFBI and others would have contributed to that, and those were the figures stated at those briefings. And the point is that we must look seriously in light of those figures, that as well as doing what I've outlined on pollution, also secure investment in our wastewater infrastructure and supporting more nature-friendly farming practices. The required DFI role and commitment here further reinforces the need for that interdepartmental and interagency approach that we often reference. The final point of the plan, Mr. Speaker, closely aligns with the motion today, creating a new legislative duty to cooperate in developing an integrated management plan. There is currently a myriad of public bodies that hold some level of responsibility for the lough and its shores, but we lack effective coordinated governance. It is for this reason that Alliance supports the call of the motion for a cross-departmental body, as well as a new management structure to include input from communities and organisations with an interest in the welfare of the lough at heart. It is at this point, Mr. Speaker, that I've added a minor amendment to the motion to ensure the inclusion of relevant non-governmental organisations to have a vital role to play also in relation to Lough Neagh, as well as the planning of these actions for the future. Northern Ireland Water is perhaps the best example of these NGOs. There will of course be others, but we must take the responsibility of those bodies very seriously and ensure that feedback and action from them is also guaranteed. Further to this, as our 5-point plan clearly highlights, any new duty to cooperate must lead to tangible, measurable and fully resourced outcomes. Alliance, Mr. Speaker, will continue to press hard on Lough Neagh because the future of our waters depends on this. For that reason, on behalf of the Alliance Party, I am content to support the Lough Neagh Rescue Plan motion today, with, of course, the amendment from ourselves added. Thank you, Speaker.
Call William Irwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is no doubt this is an issue that has concerned the general public right across the province, given the size and indeed the significance of Lough Neagh in our environment. The lough contains around 800 billion gallons, provides 40% of the province's drinking water, and therefore is very much in people's minds, especially when we see the negative impact of the algae problem and how this spread into the rivers and eventually affected portions of our coastline. The contributing factors that give rise to last year's algae blooms are many and complicated, and by all accounts will be by no means easy. I don't believe there will be any quick fixes. The exceptionally warm month of June last year, followed by a very wet July and August, are believed to be significant contributors, along with issues such as farm nutrient runoff. Scientists are clear that this bacteria grows more quickly at very warm temperatures, which is what we experienced in 2023, when then what followed was well above average rainfall, washing nutrients from the soil into the watercourses. Indeed, such was the amount of rainfall in the autumn that at one point the lough was 1.6 metres above normal levels. Then we think of the zebra mussel issue, it is interesting to note that the species that filters water and makes it cleaner has such a negative impact of allowing sunlight to penetrate much deeper into the loch, allowing the growth of bacteria and an acceleration of the algae problem. This will be another complicated issue to resolve dealing with the invasive species. I think it is very useful. We had a report on how the loch is at this very moment in time, because it has been some time since the public have had any information on the loch's actual water quality currently. I would be especially interested to inquire what impact the recent very heavy and persistent rain has had on the algae issue mixed with colder winter temperatures. I feel it is important that we have regular reports on the condition of the loch water and the impact of the loch's ecology system. That would be useful to see. It would be useful in forming further debate and action. Reduction of the algae issue will take a lot of discussion, further scientific investigation and finance to adequately resolve in the longer term. Some of these issues, I imagine, will be difficult to achieve and will be vulnerable to weather patterns. Hence, my suggestion for more detail on the loch after a period of considerable rainfall. I note that the new Dear Minister's tone on this issue is very much of managing expectations. It would be serve no one well to give false hope or of a swift resolution to this issue. All efforts by multi-agencies and the general public will be vital to ensuring success in fighting the issue. I want to see well thought out and scientifically backed up measures that can be enacted to see progress in reaching a much more acceptable level of cleanliness in the loch's water. There are many agencies and groups that can play their part in this. As we now have the Assembly back up and running, it will be important to see a strategic plan to make the types of interventions that will make a real difference to Lough Neagh. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Business Committee has arranged to meet at 1 p.m. today. I propose therefore by leave of the Assembly to suspend the sitting until 2 p.m. The next member to be called when we return will be Dr. Steve Aiken. The sitting is by leave suspended. Steve Aiken.
Mr. Speaker, as you remember, when you were the Minister for Agriculture in 2022, there was a regrettable series of deaths of dogs and other animals that were reported. To our office in Ballyclare and indeed to our local councillors. The common denominator was that these were all connected with the loch. Along with Antrim and Newtownabbey Borough Council and DAERA, inconclusive results were found. But what was clear was that the people most connected with our loch, they all expressed that their fears for its health were being ignored, and it was only a matter of time before we'd be looking at ecological disaster which would occur. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, our constituents avoided going to the loch shore. Sailors raised concerns about what happened if they capsized. Wildfowlers and fishermen expressed their fears, both publicly and privately, and the public started to keep themselves away from the loch shore. That all the warning signs had been there, and some for decades, should give no one in authority any comfort. Strikingly, it took a European Space Agency image of what should have been the blue centre of Northern Ireland, which then started looking like a Green Street Petri dish, to bring home to many of us who care about the loch what we have known for a long time. That our loch recorded a temperature of 17.4 degrees this summer, at the height of the algal bloom, shows that our loch is acting as a warning signal for the challenges that the climate emergency is bringing upon us. With the global average temperature now being recorded as being 1.5 degrees centigrade over baseline, we can regrettably expect a repeat of last year's disastrous events, especially as Lough Neagh is particularly affected by its ecology and topography. Facts that cannot be changed, along with the fact that only one river flows out of it. There are clearly central problems in the loch. That is, the amount of pollutants, the amount of invasive species, and the rising temperature. We can only deal in the medium term with the first two. The third will require a major effort to get to net zero carbon, and we all need to concentrate on getting that done fast. But right now, our loch needs our help. Now, we will hear a lot about interagency task force, co-design, and the alphabet soup of other initiatives that are out there. What we do need is we need someone who can stand up and say they're clearly responsible for protecting our loch. Someone who is willing to take the decisions, hold authority, take all other agencies and stakeholders to task, and somebody, above all, who will be held to account. Our party will be supporting this motion, but what we want to hear from the Dara Minister is that he will be that person who will be accountable for our loch and what needs to be done. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker.
I call Patsy McLone.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the motion and the opportunity to support it, and also the amendment on this very important issue. I myself am from the shores of Lough Neagh. That's where I was reared, so I'm very deeply and passionate about the future of the loch. Extremely important to me, and we'll come to other issues around reverting the loch back to where it came from. That was public ownership, and we need to deal with that issue as well. Despite efforts by the SDLP and others to recall the Assembly since the toxic algae blooms appeared last summer, this is the first opportunity this Assembly has had to actually debate the ecological crisis in Lough Neagh. Fortunately, government hasn't waited so long to respond, although they have had to do so without political direction. Indeed, those of us who have engaged directly with DAERA and other relevant agencies since June of last year, when I personally contacted the Department on this issue, will be aware of the work they have done. Their efforts have laid the groundwork for the decisions that must be taken now by the Minister and the Executive, because it's just not solely confined to one government department. I would also recommend the detailed paper by the Assembly research staff, an overview of algal blooms in Lough Neagh, which I commissioned in September and have since made publicly available, and I would commend them for the efforts they did on that. Really sterling work. And on research, one point I would like to make about that is one facility that is deeply missed along the shores of Lough Neagh, about the loch, and that is the research facility that was once upon a time at Triad Point in Ballymacguigan. That was by the University of Ulster then, and now it no longer exists. And I reckon, that's my estimation, had they been doing and been allowed to continue their sterling work, that we may not have hit the crisis that we are now in. So that may also be for another minister at another department to engage with the current Ulster University and see what research facilities can be supplemented through the university. As I say, their work was sterling. And the blooms to date are the most visible signs of the ecological crisis in Lough Neagh, but they are a symptom of an underlying and long-standing problem with the water quality in the loch. And most members will be aware of that. At present, around 50% of the North's drinking water is extracted and treated from Lough Neagh. It is also the discharge point for treated wastewater at points around the loch shore. It supports an eel fishery and the extraction, eel fishery and other fisheries, and the extraction of sand and gravel. It is also the site for a range of recreational and sporting activities. We also know that, even before the recent algae blooms that have caused so much concern, principally because of their smell and they're visible, the water quality in the loch has been in decline for some time. Since 2020, the loch has been described as being in poor status. That's just one level of the lowest status of bad in terms of ecological and chemical conditions of the water. In terms of the conditions under which algae blooms are likely to thrive, it is the build-up of excessive levels of nutrients that are the main drivers in Lough Neagh, a process called eutrophication. The annual mean temperature of Lough Neagh has also been rising in recent years. There has been a marked decrease in the cloudiness of the water. Both can contribute to the frequency of the algae blooms. The presence of the invasive zebra mussel may also be a contributing factor. But the scientific advice is that it is build-up of excessive levels of nutrients that is driving this ecological crisis. Eutrophication in Lough Neagh is an ongoing process that began in earnest in the early to mid-20th century. We have yet to begin to properly address it. Both phosphorus and nitrogen are the main nutrients involved in this process, and if you look at that particular research paper that I referred to earlier, you will see in the last 4 to 5 years the high levels of nitrates and the intensification of nitrates in the Lough. It has more than tripled, according to that research. So that process of intensification of those nitrates and phosphates in the Lough, it must be addressed. Recent research by Ulster University suggests that it could take decades, and other members have referred to this, to achieve a good status for water quality in the Lough because of the current phosphorus levels already in the Lough sediment. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, but just that real recovery will take time. But it needs time, it needs commitment, it needs policy drivers, and it needs investment. The public awareness generated by the impact of the algae blooms of last summer may provide the necessary impetus to this Assembly and elected members and its executive to take the action required. DERA's draft River Basin Management Plan has identified the potential main sources for nutrients in the Lough as runoff from agricultural land use and pressures on sewage infrastructure. There's much more could be said, Mr. Speaker, and inevitably it will be, but I'm looking forward to not words but actions from the executive. Thank you.
Linda Dillon, please.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this motion today. So, as we all know, the issues facing Lough Neagh are, whilst maybe not insurmountable, are not simple or quick fixes, as has already been outlined by the previous speaker. But I do think the starting point needs to be bringing the Lough back into public ownership. And this was a motion that was proposed by Francie Malloy, who was an MLA here at the time and is now the MP for Mid-Ulster, in this chamber in 2011, and it has been something that he has argued strongly for and done quite a substantial amount of work on in trying to bring it back into public ownership and work with others to do so, including Shaftesbury himself. So we need to take that on seriously. We need to look at how it can be done. We need to work together to ensure that it is done. There needs to be a strong cross-departmental focus, and all of those with an interest in the Lough, in particular the local community, must be a part of the solution. I know that there are representatives here today from Lough Neagh Partnership, and many people in my constituency of Mid-Ulster will be following this closely. We value the Lough, and like the previous speaker, I live not far from the Lough shore, just up from the Wishing Bay. And the response to the concerns around the health of the Lough last summer gives us some sense of how much local people love and value this amazing natural resource that must be protected. Indeed, it was an issue that exercised many in my constituency, including children at local schools who wrote to me, and I want us to leave a legacy of a healthy Lough, of a good natural resource to those children who wrote to us, and that is the commitment that I want us to give to them today. And I'm not ashamed to admit that, given my own proximity, as I've outlined, that I am absolutely biased and see it as an issue that must be prioritised in the executive going forward. There is massive tourism potential right around the Lough, but it's not being realised due to the lack of ownership and lack of a cross-departmental plan and responsibility for that plan. A group of local people have been campaigning for the Barmouth to be dredged to allow boats to travel freely from the River Blackwater into Lough Neagh. So, firstly, that Lough Neagh rescue services can get up the river to respond to emergencies, but also so that local people can take their boats out, and most importantly, that we can unlock that vital tourism potential. And I think Waterways Ireland need to be a part of this conversation also, and I hope that the NSMC will be used as a vehicle to look at this as a cross-border issue. I can't talk about Lough Neagh and not mention its value to our local fishing industry, to the local fishing families who have fished on the Lough for many, many generations, and to the eel fishery, and the value to the local community in their own leisure, including cold water dipping, which has become very popular I know, for a leisure activity, but it has actually got very beneficial value for those with mental health issues. Apologies, yes.
The member from Ulster mentioned the eel fishery, as you did yourself, and one of my strongest, most abiding childhood memories is actually trying the wild eels from Lough Neagh and my Auntie Rita and Uncle Barney's house in Glenavy on the Lough shores. Would the member agree with me that the most effective and sustainable way to secure and maintain ecological equilibrium at Lough Neagh, including the protection of its wildlife and the tourism potential, and the largest eel fishery in Europe, would be to bring the loch back into public ownership?
Absolutely, and that is why I outlined that as the starting point at the beginning of my speech. And as I say, our MP, Francie Malloy, has worked on that over many, many years, and I know others have been involved in that conversation too. And we need to grasp that nettle and take it on. So it is clear that we all understand that there needs to be unity of purpose, and I am up for working with everyone who is genuinely interested. But the key to unlocking, as the member has outlined, to unlocking all of the issues on the loch is once and for all dealing with the ownership of the loch. Gurmil Mayad.
Call Tom Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lough Neagh, the largest freshwater lake in the United Kingdom, measuring over 300 square kilometres, is no doubt one of Northern Ireland's crown jewels, with the shores touching 5 of our 6 counties. It's one of the most beautiful natural assets and is an important resource in terms of our drinking water, with 40+% of the drinking water in our homes coming from this resource. It is therefore important that NI Water provide continued assurances around the safety of the water that is being extracted for drinking purposes. But Lough Neagh is also an important resource, as we've already heard, in terms of traditional fishing or farming industries, as well as commercial and tourism facilities, and needs to be protected against any future damage. It is of grave concern that this natural asset, which has much more future potential, has been allowed to fall into such decline over the past years. With some 20 public bodies, including government agencies and departments involved in Lough Neagh, it is concerning that this problem was not nipped in the bud some time ago, rather than allowing it to fester to the situation that we are faced with today. A problem that just didn't arise overnight, but a problem that's been ongoing for some considerable time. It is ironic, though, that in such situations, a lot of the time the finger of blame is always pointed at the farming community, the very custodians of the countryside, when there is no real factual evidence for this assertions. We are not saying the agriculture industry is squeaky clean, but whenever a problem is identified within the industry, measures are always taken to seek to resolve that particular problem. It is fair to say that the agriculture industry has made significant strides in developing best practice and taking responsible action to reduce any risk of runoff from their lands. As an industry, I have no doubt they can and they will do more to seek to resolve and to seek to stop any runoff from their land. But there are also a number of other contributing factors to this problem concerning Lough Neagh. In recent research I read, it indicated that the biggest factor impacting how algae grows in Lough Neagh is actually increased water temperatures. And it went on to state that nitrate levels in the Lough were now half or less than half of what they were some years ago. And there is no correlation between phosphorus levels on the farmland surrounding the Lough and the phosphorus levels in the Lough, with the conclusion that the increased algae growth in the Lough is not attributed to the agriculture industry or the agriculture community. However, today as we stand in this House, we are faced with a huge problem, which will require collective responsibility from all involved, with a multi-agency approach and a long-term strategy to resolving the current problem and securing solid foundations and right resources to ensure that the current situation in the Lough and all the threats to wildlife and habitats are addressed in a sustainable manner. We as a party are committed to protecting our environment heritage, which will be key to Northern Ireland's success for generations to come. We must work together if we want to see this issue addressed, to restore the Lough to not only its former glory, but to a greater glory than what it originally was at, for our local communities, for increased tourism within the area, and indeed for our local people and local recreation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on the motion.
I call Sean Mulholland.
Mr. Speaker, and can I take the opportunity to congratulate you on your new role? Although I rise as the representative of North Antrim, I think my accent belies the fact that North Antrim is not my first home. Up until last year, when I moved my family to a view of Rathlin Island, we had a view of Rams Island in Lough Neagh, which was the home place of my great-grandmother, Jane Cardwell, the last person to ever live on that island. I speak and I have an interest in Lough Neagh as the proud daughter, niece and granddaughter of eel fishermen. The loch was a hugely important part of my childhood, and it was heartbreaking to see the perfect storm of factors that converged last summer, which is why I, alongside colleagues like John Blair, worked on the Alliance's 5-point plan for the management of the Lough Neagh emergency. I know only too well the economic importance of Lough Neagh, whether it's the wholesale and international supply of fish, or the leisure facilities, or even the tourist output. The loch is a vital player in our economic output. And we saw the impact last summer when businesses, organisations and individuals had to abandon activities on the loch due to the proliferation of algal blooms, with a number of businesses in constituencies that border mine having to permanently close their doors as a result. I know, having met with stakeholders from fishermen, environmentalists to farmers, that so many expect action from this Assembly, and rightly so. However, this was not an issue that occurred overnight or as a result of the actions of one element within the ecosystem surrounding Lough Neagh. Therefore, a solution will not be reached overnight or with the burden placed on one department or agency. We must have a properly resourced, cross-departmental approach that factors in stakeholders and communities from all across the board, hence our slight amendment to this motion. I want to see a review of the governance of our environmental performance. I believe that comprehensive independent oversight is long overdue, and I repeat my party colleagues' call for an independent Environment Protection Agency. Given that NIEA is part of the department, its powers are some ways limited. So I want to see and push for the establishment of an agency with the authority and autonomy to oversee and enforce our environmental laws. This would allow for the penalties and fines for polluting our environment to be addressed and to be used as an effective deterrent. I want to see the reversal of the cap on repeat offenders as part of a broader review of the fines and penalties for polluters. Given that there are a myriad of public bodies that hold some level of responsibility for the loch and its shores, it is more imperative now, more so now than ever, to compel those stakeholders to work together to develop an integrated management plan. To date, there has been very little evidence of a joined-up approach, which I can only observe as having a negative impact on the way forward to a solution for the health of the loch as a vital asset. Overall, I want to see a way forward together with the loch, its businesses, communities and ecology at the heart, the ultimate goal being a return to the healthy loch generations of my family knew and fished upon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good call, Keith Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And firstly, I'd like to congratulate the Minister on his position. Look forward to working with him on many aspects, whether it be environment, agriculture or rural affairs, and appreciate the work you'll do on that. Also like to thank the members opposite for bringing the motion, and obviously the amendment. We'll be supporting both those today. As a member from Ulster, a lot of my constituency borders the shores of Lough Neagh, and I recognise the importance of the loch to local industries, including tourism, fishing, leisure activities and wildlife. Lough Neagh is one of the crown jewels of Northern Ireland. However, we are concerned it has been allowed to decline over many, many years. This past year has brought it to the fore of the loch and many of the issues around it, and has highlighted the importance of it to Northern Ireland. The DUP is committed to a long-term multi-agency strategy to improving water quality. Over the past year, I engaged with loch users, fishermen, fisherwomen, and various agencies, including Lough Neagh Partnership and Ulster Farmers Union, as well as meeting with relevant government departments and officials. I have seen for myself the problems facing the loch and recognise something needs to happen to address the issue. We acknowledge that securing better outcomes means going beyond simply addressing issues around management. The DUP is committed to protecting our environmental heritage, which will be key in Northern Ireland's success for generations to come. However, we must deal with the facts. In total, 42% of Northern Ireland's surface area drains into Lough Neagh, and we must establish exactly what is causing the problem. The issue is not just a problem in Lough Neagh. Blue-green algae appeared in different parts across the United Kingdom and the world. Although blooms are more common in months with more sunlight, they can also occur following heavy rainfall. There are different narratives around the problem, and we must ensure we are focused on not just focused on one industry. We need to look at the problem across the board. Without doing this, the problem will not be resolved effectively before any issue can be addressed. The cause must be established and accurate data produced to verify this. I will need you.
For his commitment to a strategy to address the issue and also his desire for evidence, would he therefore share my assessment that an independent environmental protection agency is needed to support that work?
I'm not going to get into the debate about who's doing the work.
Next minute.
Thank you. I'm not going to get into the debate about who can do the work, as long as the work is done on all sectors that the finger's been pointed at, whether it's be agriculture, environmental, from a NI water point of view, septic tanks. We see those three people getting, let's call it, the finger pointed at them. As long as we can stand over the data, or who does that is irrelevant, in my opinion. So the data must be clear to see the benefits that work has been currently carried out. For example, in the Ballinary catchment area, work's been carried out on that river with different, fencing activities, damaged concrete, spoutings, etc. around farm buildings. But we need to establish that that work has been a benefit, and we see the benefits of that work in the figures, whatever way the figures are produced. Then we will see what the actual issue is. Without looking across the board, the problem will not be resolved effectively. Before any issue can be addressed, the cause must be established and accurate data produced to verify this. Ownership has been the focus of some. In fact, some people have been fascinated by ownership of the loch, whenever the ownership is not actually what's causing the issue. So, my opinion is ownership, yes, it's not causing the actual problem. Yes, it can be looked at to see the benefits if owned, and the conversation certainly to be had, but don't deviate from the actual problem. People is focused and fascinated on ownership, with it not being the issue. There are other issues within the loch more broadly: the tourism potential, navigation and access to waterways connected to the loch. As a previous speaker mentioned, the black water where access to the loch is hampered, dangerous and at times impossible. This is an area also to be addressed, with dredging required if access to this waterway and other reach their potential. I appreciate the work of some campaigners trying to resolve this issue. My party's leadership has been proactively engaging with core stakeholders, including the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, NIA and Lough Neagh Partnership, to monitor the situation. There are understandably calls for governance arrangement to be placed on a statutory footing, particularly in order to support a more joined-up approach. That is something we would be supportive of. Many different stakeholders have responsibility for what happens to our loch and other inland waterways, including Upper and Lower Lough Erne. Agriculture has already made changes in relation to ensuring responsible practices and reducing risk of runoff. Nutrients going into Lough Neagh is a historic issue, going back many generations, and continues to have a concern. Farmers are not naive and understand they have a part to play, but only a part to play. It is not just the responsibility of farmers, but landowners, businesses, homeowners, us all, those with septic tanks and sewage treatment responsibilities across Northern Ireland. If we as a society can't even keep our rubbish in the car and take it home, have we the moral compass to address this issue collectively? Other agencies, including NI Water, the Northern Environment Agency, need to look at their practices, issues and policies. We must also consider natural factors, including the invasive zebra mussels, as they are also contributors to this problem. We must ensure the public are aware of the consequences and impact of their actions. Promoting personal responsibility should be front and centre of future efforts. In closing, we must acknowledge this is a problem that will not be easily remedied. Our primary focus should be on securing solid foundations and the right resources to ensure the current situation in the loch and all threats to wildlife and habitats are addressed in a sustainable manner. As previously mentioned, we must identify the actual causes and then work collectively to address these. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Mr. Tom Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do welcome the opportunity to to discuss and debate this important matter here today, and I thank the members for bringing forward this motion. Lough Neagh, like many other natural environments in Northern Ireland, is vital to the well-being of the area and indeed the country. The basis of the motion calls for a cross-departmental body to be set up to address the immediate issues facing Lough Neagh, something that we in the Ulster Unionist Party called for over 5 months ago. The motion goes on to call on the Executive to put in place a new management structure and a plan to include input from communities and organisations with an interest in the welfare of the lough. And I accept there are too many organisations that work in isolation. They work in their own silos, but they don't work collectively, and I think that is one of the difficulties that we have. And one that the member for Mid-Ulster did mention was Waterways Ireland. And I had a meeting with the Chief Executive of Waterways Ireland specifically about Lough Neagh, and the Chief Executive says, I can't do anything about it. It doesn't come under my remit at all. I have no responsibility, I have no management. So I'm not sure why Waterways Ireland, that's responsible for inland waterways throughout Northern and Republic of Ireland, haven't some responsibility, but that's a matter for another day. The motion itself and the amendment, I was just curious because I thought the motion actually covered the areas that the amendment actually falls into as well. And I was a bit surprised at that amendment, Mr. Speaker, simply because I was hoping that we'd all flocked around the motion, because I'm not sure what extra the amendment does, except it seems to indicate to me that other bodies, as well as cross-departmental organisations, that other bodies are allowed into the main structure and decision-making. And I would feel that somewhat difficult to manage. I accept the premise of it, but I just feel it would be much more difficult to get decisions and manage. Happy to give way. Blair.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for giving way, and I hope I can give some sort of reassurance as well as asking for some clarification from the member. And I'll thank him again for taking the intervention. Does the member agree that there actually is a very fundamentally strong case to include non-governmental organisations such as Northern Ireland Water, who have been mentioned for a variety of reasons in relation to the problems with Lough Neagh? That, I can assure the member through you, Mr. Speaker, is the intent of the amendment, and I hope that the member can accept that.
The member's next minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank Mr. Blair for the clarification. But I do think the way it's worded, it would allow a whole range of organisations to be subject and in that decision-making process. So I wouldn't, to be honest, look forward to Friends of the Earth and the Ulster Farmers Union and all of those organisations getting into a decision-making body. But if it's something less than that Mr. Blair's explaining, then I'm willing and happy to accept that. And as others have pointed out, of course, the finger of blame always points towards the farmers, although I do appreciate Ms McColland did indicate that she didn't single out any group, which I do appreciate and acknowledge. And, you know, we're on a pathway to net zero, and I wouldn't like to think that this was going to be used as some sort of battering ram towards the farming community, because we need to meet those targets, as challenging as they are. And as much as I oppose some of those targets, and the Climate Change Committee in the UK didn't support them either, they had a different target, but we have to accept that is where we are. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, by slaughtering half of the livestock and farm animals in Northern Ireland is not going to resolve the issue for Northern Ireland, and will not help to meet the targets. But I wanted to look at one other area outside of the farming community, and that is water usage in Northern Ireland. And 560 million litres of good quality drinking water is supplied to households and organisations every day in Northern Ireland, all of which goes through 5 treatment systems, and some of which are chemical treatment systems. So you can imagine the amount of chemicals that's being used, and there's 330 million litres of wastewater per day is collected from households and organisations that are connected to the Northern Ireland sewerage system, and transfer it to works where it's again treated and disposed of again. So the amount of treatment is within NI water surely must contribute significantly. And I did hear the figures raised by Mr Blair earlier. That's not taking into consideration the amount of septic tanks that's within the community as well. But another area that we have no control of, zebra mussels are in Lough Neagh, just as they are in Lough Erne, caused huge havoc, caused huge difficulty, and we don't seem to have any control over them. But maybe, Mr Speaker, the new Minister will have a fundamental idea that we can all weigh in behind to sort out the zebra mussel problems in Northern Ireland. So a number of initiatives have been suggested, but there are other initiatives, and to help Lough Neagh, we need to look at areas like anaerobic digestion and woodland buffer zones. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Elliott. I now call Peter McReynolds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following on from yesterday's important motions on childcare and planning reform and the previous debate on a women's health strategy, it's good to see the crisis at Lough Neagh is also high on the agenda of this Assembly, and can I thank Mr McGuigan for tabling this motion today. I also echo many of the sentiments articulated by previous speakers, with the rescue and protection of the loch being essential for public health, a thriving economy and wider society. I've quickly learned from my colleague Ms Armstrong yesterday that as I'm speaking after my colleagues, I'll try not to repeat the previously mentioned arguments. In my own experience, I was fortunate to be able to attend some of the cross-departmental briefings last year as the crisis emerged and MLAs heard what could and would need done to address what quickly became a global news story. A number of charities and environmental groups were crucial in highlighting what was happening, with Friends of the Earth hosting a cross-party roundtable discussion in the MAC in the Belfast City Centre, and a number of problems facing the Lough and groups like the Lough Neagh Partnership, RSPB, Northern Ireland Environmental Link and Ulster Wildlife playing crucial roles in capturing the mood of the population as pictures and videos became more frequent on our screens. And I thank them for acting as swiftly and as passionately as they did. I'd like to take this opportunity to speak to this motion to remind members that repeated patterns of algae blooms were found in several locations across Northern Ireland. This is consistent with the assessment that, unfortunately, none of our waterways are considered to be in good health. Significant declines have also been reported in the quality of rivers, lakes and coastal waters here in Northern Ireland. Contamination does not just occur from agricultural runoff, as we've heard already today, but also, as my colleague Mr Blair advised in his opening remarks, 24% of contamination is due to untreated sewage effluent, which regularly overflows into our watercourses. Our rapidly changing climate is also seeing increased frequencies of extreme rainfall, which force this raw, untreated sewage into watercourses via combined sewer overflow pipes. Mr Speaker, we cannot fully safeguard strategic environmental assets such as Lough Neagh with a wastewater system that has barely been updated since it was built. We are now at a crisis point with wastewater and sewage infrastructure in Northern Ireland, with over 100 areas across the region where wastewater infrastructure is at or near full capacity. These capacity challenges, coupled with chronic underinvestment, are contributing to environmentally damaging overspills. Unfortunately, our struggling wastewater infrastructure ensures that sewer flooding and pollution into watercourses is a regular occurrence. The regrettable and unintended consequence of historically not investing and enhancing this vital infrastructure enough is that it leads to our polluted rivers and harms biodiversity. The intensification of demand on a struggling system has exacerbated inadequate environmental protections because the infrastructure was not built to separate rainwater runoff and sewage at source. Part of the solution to protect Lough Neagh, as well as every other watercourse in Northern Ireland, is to make sure Northern Ireland Water is able to contribute towards ensuring the long-term health of our waterways. Lastly, and touching upon the remarks from the member prior to me, on one of my recent rare journeys outside of East Belfast, I was fortunate to be shown the sheer scale of the operation to deliver safe, clean drinking water at a water treatment plant just outside Carrickfergus. And I would encourage members to call out and engage with water treatment plants near you and to see how this is actually done for yourselves. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted this motion has appeared so early for debate in this chamber. I support the motion and, of course, the amendment, and I look forward to working towards the rescue and improvement of Lough Neagh on a cross-departmental basis. Thank you.
Call Morris Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I add my congratulations to the Minister on taking up his new post, and look forward to working with him through the mandate. Mr. Speaker, several members have alluded to the high level of phosphorus and nitrates in Lough Neagh, and indeed the invasive species of zebra mussel and their ability to filter up to a litre of water each per day. I have no intention of repeating those valid points already raised. However, whilst we are rightly looking at improving the ecological and environmental state of the lough, it is also important that we look at what is going into Lough Neagh and what is coming out. 6 major rivers feed the lough: the Ballinderry, Myola, 6 Mile Water, Blackwater, the Main and the Upper Bann itself. Only one river flows out, the Lower Bann, and that wends its way through counties Antrim and Londonderry to the Barmouth between Castlerock and Portstewart, including through Coleraine, the principal town of the Causeway Coast Plains. As someone who has had the privilege of fishing for white trout at Dugan's Bay and the tidal stretch of the Bann, above the cuts at the Lough Island for salmon, including the big and wee Agibby rivers, the beaches of Downhill, Castlerock and Portstewart for flounder and sea bass, I am all too aware of the debris that flows through the River Bann into the sea from Lough Neagh. And that includes the irregular flow of water being released from the lough in inclement weather and in times of high levels of water on the lough itself. Last year's algae bloom saw 25 confirmed instances between the Lower Bann at Toome and the Barmouth at Castlerock and Portstewart. It is not just Lough Neagh, but along the Lower Bann corridor, affecting angling and tourism, especially in the north coast bathing beaches. Everything that is waterborne emerging from Lough Neagh flows along the Bann and out to sea. Therefore, nitrates and phosphates need to be prevented from entering the lough at source. Mr. Speaker, when you were Minister of Dara, you initiated an ambitious tree planting scheme. We need to continue with that thought by planting riparian tree and vegetation cover along our rivers entering Lough Neagh to catch some of the leachate from farmland, and also find a natural solution to the invasive species of zebra mussel, preferably a natural predator rather than a chemical solution. I would add my support to the Dara Minister as he grapples with this ecological time bomb. I would agree with others that this problem needs cross-departmental support, but I would encourage the Minister to not just look at the lough itself, but to include the waterways feeding into the lough and the one river that flows out, the Lower Bann. Mention has been alluded to here about eel fishing. I can remember the ropes at the cuts, black with elvers making their way upstream. That is no longer the case. Unfortunately, that is something that needs to be looked into as well. Hence the need to have a holistic approach to Lough Neagh and its associated waterways. I would be happy to support both the motion and the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Matthew O'Toole.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. May I, first of all, on the record and in the chamber, congratulate Andrew Muir on his appointment as ERA Minister, and join with others. There's an historical significance given Andrew as an LGBT man, but also I believe the first Alliance Party Environment and Agriculture Minister. So two first, one a little more important than the other, but I congratulate him. Mr. Speaker, today's a gorgeous day. The grounds of Stormont are spectacular, as we all know. It is a beautiful, after some fairly unremarkable weather recently. It's gorgeous today. It's a really cold, spectacular winter's day when you stand and look down the hill. And sometimes the beauty of this place, this island, can mask what's happening more broadly and more deeply in our ecology and our environment, which is that our planet is slowly warming. As was mentioned earlier on by, I think, Steve Aiken, last year was the first full year in which, on an aggregate basis, the average temperature on Earth was above 1.5 degrees, had risen above 1.5 degrees above the baseline that countries had set themselves. That was a horrifying milestone. What's happening in Lough Neagh is in many ways a chilling, and that's probably the wrong word, ironically, it is a frightening manifestation of what is happening to ecologies and environments all over this planet. It is intimately, irrefutably and inextricably connected to our warming planet. planet, and we should not be in denial about that. It has multiple causes, but the causes are not, as some have indicated today, impossible to ascertain or mysterious or elusive. They're real, and we know what they are. I'm pleased that this motion is before the Assembly, just as I'm pleased that other important motions have been debated in the Assembly today and yesterday. And I'm pleased that there is at least a degree of rhetorical consensus. But there has to be more than consensus. There has to be action. There has to be real, meaningful action that addresses what is at least a half-century of degradation of Lough Neagh, our greatest natural asset. It is clear and irrefutable that for a range of reasons, but primarily two reasons: one, agricultural runoff, and two, runoff from wastewater, there are now unacceptable, or have been for decades now, unacceptable levels of particularly phosphorus in Lough Neagh, which are causing the loch to be far too warm, warmer than it was ever supposed to be, and led to what was last year, frankly, a shocking, almost otherworldly appearance. It looked like something from a sci-fi movie, and it smelt like something indescribable, to be honest. I know lots of us went down to the loch shore. My colleague Patsy McGlone, Councillor Denise Johnson, whose family earn their living as Lough Neagh fishermen, did huge work. But the loch shore was an extraordinary sight last year. So we do need more than words and consensus on how awful it is. We need real action. I am sure that the new Agriculture Minister will take this seriously. I'm sure he will want, the Agriculture and Environment Minister, I should say, will want to take this seriously. It is going to take much longer than his time in office. It will that we will be dealing with this problem long after he leaves office, and probably long after most of us have left this chamber. But we do have to be honest with the public. We can't simply put down motions that express aspirations to do things about things and then not be honest with people about the trade-offs involved. So let's be honest about what those will be. They will be real decisions around what we put into that loch. It is basically a big bowl through which the whole of Northern Ireland, into which the whole of Northern Ireland drains, as was said by Maurice Bradley, the previous speaker. There is only one river that flows out. That has nothing, by the way, to do with demonising agriculture. In fact, it is farmers who are the custodians of that loch, because they're the ones who farm around it. But we do need to support them and give them the structure, the regulatory structure, into which they can make the decisions that they want to make to protect it. We also need investment in our wastewater infrastructure. We do need that. Those aren't elusive, impossible things that we can't understand. They need to be in a programme for government, they need to be costed, and they need to be delivered by this executive. I also want to say I agree with those who say we need to bring Lough Neagh into public ownership. I am disappointed that that is not in today's motion, because that is also something that is real, meaningful, that can be delivered. So while I agree with the sentiments in today's motion, what my party will be doing as a constructive opposition is holding those who have governmental power to account for actually delivering it and beginning the long-term work of saving our greatest natural resource from death. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I call Mr. Jerry Carroll.
I've been proud to campaign alongside Lough Neagh communities and local environmental activists in the Lough Neagh Save Lough Neagh campaign to demand action to resolve this unfolding crisis. One of the things that is repeated by these activists is not that the loch is dying, but it's being murdered. And it gives me absolute no pleasure in saying this, that it's the executive parties here who are responsible for that killing, in large part at least. Because it has been years of government mistreatment and the prioritisation of private profits that has driven the Lough Neagh to the brink of collapse, threatening wildlife, important local ecosystems, and poison the very water we drink. The toxic algal blooms are just a visual representation of the danger Stormont ministers repeatedly ignored. Environmental campaigners warned about the state of the loch. Ministers were repeatedly questioned about the destruction of Lough Neagh, about the legal and illegal sand dredging, and about the big industrial polluters who are using our waterways as their own private sewer. And rather than tackle the problem, the destruction was further fuelled by disastrous Stormont initiatives like Going for Growth. The scheme, passed around a decade ago, incentivised the creation of industrial, factory-style farms which have been spilling their poison into our waterways ever since. In 2018, the waste produced by the pig industry alone was the equivalent to the waste of 12 million humans. Unbelievable stuff. And parties here were warned about the lack of infrastructure for dealing with the increased waste, but signed off on the plan anyway. And Mr Speaker, you as former Minister were obviously in charge at the time, but the scheme was also signed off by Sinn Féin, the DUP Alliance, the SDLP and the UUP. Must be said, Speaker, as Minister, also you lessened the fines for those polluting Lough Neagh and its tributaries. Mr Speaker, in the face of repeated objections, SDLP Infrastructure Minister Nicola Mallon also allowed commercial sand dredging at Lough Neagh, which still stirs up the nutrients that are choking Lough Neagh with the occurrence of toxic algal blooms. Stormont also refused to issue penalties for illegal sand dredging. And Mr Speaker, also she mentioned that the First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, resisted calls to take the lake bed into public ownership. People won't forget the positions taken by former ministers. The bottom line is this, Mr Speaker. At every single turn, Stormont's establishment parties ignored environmental concerns and opted effectively to destroy Lough Neagh when there was a quick private profit to be made. I think it's good to see a motion to recognise the vital importance of Lough Neagh. I hope that it signals a change of tact from Stormont's parties. I hope the Minister in charge now, wish him well, takes a different approach as well, but if he doesn't, we'll be ready to challenge him. And just finally, on behalf of the Save Lough Neagh campaign, I want to lay some demands which could help save this vital natural resource. We need an independent environmental protection agency with the power to hold polluters to account. We need urgent investment in research and a recovery plan. We need to end commercial dredging and reduce sewage dumping and runoff. We need a rights of nature status for Lough Neagh. And finally, we need to bring Lough Neagh back into public ownership and allow it to be managed by the communities and workers who depend on it. The Earl of Shaftesbury's ancestors stole the loch. He has profited from its destruction and he shouldn't get a single penny for it, and the state should move to take it away from him. Lough Neagh is a vital natural resource that should belong to us all. Financial interests of a wealthy few should not come above our natural environment, our drinking water and the livelihoods of so many who rely on the loch. And musician turned activist, environmental activist Fergal Sharkey said about zebra mussels, and I quote, "What a load of crap. The issue is simple, too much bad stuff going into the loch." And I'm not an environmental expert, but I'll take my lesson and direction from Mr Fergal Sharkey. Thank you.
All the Minister, Andrew Muir, for Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. You have 15 minutes, Mr Muir.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and may I first start by thanking the members for bringing this issue to the floor for discussion. It's good to be back in a functioning Assembly with the Executive restored, and it's also good to see the goodwill that's been shown towards each other and the consensus that is emerging in relation to this issue. I do thank also members for the kind comments to myself in terms of my appointment. It is my strong desire as Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to work with members, with the sectors that come under the remit of my department and wider society, because that's the only way we're going to achieve solutions in relation to Lough Neagh and many other challenges that are facing us across Northern Ireland at the moment. As I highlighted to the Executive at its first meeting last week, it is encouraging to see agreement on the need for collective action, not just in government, but also working with users, local residents and stakeholder organisations to bring long-term solutions to this issue within Lough Neagh and water quality in general. Such is the importance I place on this issue, I made it a priority to visit Lough Neagh last week in my first few days as Minister. During that visit, I met with stakeholders in the Lough Neagh Partnership to listen and see and hear firsthand the extent of the issue. This is just the beginning of my engagement with stakeholders, and I intend to regularly seek views and work together to take forward evidence-based solutions to tackle blue-green algae and secure long-term water quality improvements. Last week, I made a specific commitment to go back there on a regular basis on at least a quarterly occasions, and I think it's important that I fulfil that. In terms of the opening remarks by the proposer of this motion from Philip McGuigan and our MLA running club, which didn't last too long, I can confirm to him and other members that last night I entered Lap the Lough Cycling Sportif, which is an 89 miles cycle ride around Lough Neagh. I hope he will join me for that. He'll probably beat me in relation to that, so I'll put that out now. But Lough Neagh is a key part of our community. It's a real asset for Northern Ireland, and it's something I'm looking forward to enjoying those all 89 miles in August ahead. I wish to make it clear also from the outset and reassure members that I will not shy away from my responsibilities as Minister to do the work that needs to be done to tackle these issues. Whilst we all recognise that it will take significant time, investment, commitment and working in partnership to make the improvements needed, we all wish to see those improvements effected. The scale of the problem should not prevent us from taking action now, and we need to move from debating these motions to taking action. As Minister, I am willing and ready to lead, to drive action, to coordinate, but may I say the responsibility is upon us all in this chamber and in the Executive to turn the situation around. And there is a unity of purpose here today, and let's go forward with that and let's grasp the issues ahead. Our natural environment is under significant pressure and most indicators are moving in the wrong direction. Urgent collaborative action and investment is needed to tackle what the public increasingly see as a joint climate and biodiversity crisis. The blue-green algae issue most notably manifest on Lough Neagh, but also in other water bodies across Northern Ireland, cannot be seen in isolation from the natural environment more generally as we tackle its problems, and we cannot tackle its problems in isolation either. No problem.
I thank the Minister for his statement. Minister, just in relation to the other areas where this has been identified, is the Minister aware of recent traces in Murlough in my own constituency, particularly in Strabane?
Thank you. I am indeed. I'm aware that this isn't just an issue in Lough Neagh, and it speaks to what I've already outlined. This is a wider issue that we all need to face together. For the reasons I have outlined, in the next few weeks I will bring to the Executive a new environment strategy, which I will propose is adopted as Northern Ireland's first environmental improvement plan. This will take a strategic approach to all the issues facing our environment. Can I say that on taking office, there is a mountain of issues that I have to address, and many of which have built up over 2 years of no executive. Not having an executive has not come without consequences. I am determined to do the work to turn this around, but we can never let the situation happen again. I recognise, as do my officials, the vital importance of Lough Neagh to our environment, ecology and drinking water supply. I also recognise its wider importance to tourism, fishing and leisure activities in communities not just surrounding the lough but across Northern Ireland. I am also aware of the wider debate in terms of ownership of Lough Neagh and the contributions here today. I welcome the news that Lough Neagh Partnership has secured funding to explore future management and ownership of the lough, and I look forward to seeing the publication of that research. I also welcome the approach that has been made to me by Lord Shaftesbury, and I am looking forward to meeting with him in a frank and open manner in the weeks ahead. As members will no doubt know, Lough Neagh is the largest freshwater lake in these islands. Its catchment is approximately 43% of the land area of Northern Ireland. Indeed, the size and scale of Lough Neagh and its catchment adds to the complexity of dealing with the blue-green algae issues in the lough itself. And that's illustrated when you look at a map in terms of the catchment area. This isn't just the lough. The lough supplies half of Belfast's drinking water and 40% of Northern Ireland's overall drinking water requirements. These are significant figures in any context and underline the need for us to invest in turning this around and the importance of the lough in terms of our environment and our economy. Lough Neagh is highly... Yes,
thanks very much, Minister, for giving way. Just on December the 15th, I and other members of the party met with officials from your department, and on that occasion they outlined to us that there were some 113 recommendations that they were bringing forward to the department for to deal with Lough Neagh, the issues. So could you maybe advise me, please, of those 113 proposals, if in fact they are currently 113 now, are those to be enshrined either in part or in total within the environmental strategy that you've just referred to?
Thank the member for his intervention. I will turn to that, but what I will say is we have a number of actions that are starting to emerge. I want to be able to bring these forward to the Executive and to the Assembly, but also with stakeholders, because what I want to do as Minister is work with people. I don't want to have people having surprises in relation to this. I want people bought in relation to this. So I need to buy members into this. I need to buy the Executive into this. I need to buy in the Minister for Finance in relation to this, but also the users, the residents and the non-governmental organisations around the loch, and that is crucial. This is not going to be easy, but I'm prepared to do the work to make it deliver. Lough Neagh is highly protected with multiple designations, each of which afford Lough Neagh and its features special protection. The ASSI designation lists 23 protected features, including a range of aquatic birds, shoreline habitats, breeding and wintering bird assemblages, and freshwater invertebrate and fish assemblages, indicating just how much the loch's precious ecosystem is considered to be scientifically important. With this in mind, the events of last spring, summer and autumn, when algae blooms appeared at multiple locations in the loch and its wider catchment, as well as locations along the north coast, were devastating for all to witness. Having visited Lough Neagh in person last week, I fully understand and empathise not just with the distress, but the anger of members of the public as these events unfolded. These events unfolded at the surface of the loch. The reality is this has been going on below the loch. The blooms appeared at such an unprecedented level during 2023 due to 4 main factors. The highest water temperature ever recorded in Lough Neagh, the weather patterns experienced during the summer of 2023, warmer waters and altered weather patterns exacerbated the frequency and the intensity of the algae bloom outbreaks. Also, the high level of excess nutrients entering the loch, mostly from agricultural sources, but also from Northern Ireland Water wastewater infrastructure, and to the lesser extent from domestic wastewater treatment systems, and also the large numbers of invasive zebra mussels found within the loch, which increase the clarity of the water. And I would clarify in saying this, I'm not in the blame game. I'm into solving the issues here, and that's what we want to be able to do, is work with people to resolve these issues. And there isn't just one source in relation to this. The circumstances which led to last year's algae blooms have been decades in the making and taken with the undeniable impact of climate change. It means that there is no quick fixes to the occurrence and probable reoccurrence of blue-green algae blooms at Lough Neagh. However, this should not stop us from taking action, and it is important we start to work collectively to address the problem immediately. And I would turn to the comments from the proposer of the amendment in terms of an independent environmental protection agency. Members will be aware it's a long-standing commitment of the Alliance Party and myself personally to establish an independent environmental protection agency. We have to ask ourselves, if that agency had been established many years ago, would we be making this debate and this statement here today? But what I want to do is I want to work with people on this. I want to make the case for it, and I know I need to do that to certain sectors. So as a first step, I've asked officials to commence an environmental governance review, particularly important as a result of our exit from the EU, to understand where we are at the moment and then to move forward. I really do repeat, I want to work with people in relation to this, but it's my strong desire to establish an independent environmental protection agency, because we need to have an independent oversight to ensure that we don't have situations like this occurring ever again. Yes, no problem.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very, very quickly, I notice in other areas that does have an independent environment agency, the likes of the Lake District, they have blue-green algae, and it hasn't stopped it there. Now, I'm not making a case, that's a debate for another day around the Independent Environment Agency, but I'm just saying they still have it, even with the agency.
Thank the member for his intervention, and I'm very conscious of that. But the issue for me is that, do we have someone to call us out in relation to that? Do we have someone to call me out in relation to that? Now, that's why we need to do the environmental governance review, because we also have the Office of Environmental Protection and how that relates in relation to this. But this is about something to assist us as politicians, as stakeholders in relation to this. And I look forward to meeting with stakeholders, as I've been doing over the last number of days, over the time ahead, to discuss these issues. and I'm conscious that Northern Ireland isn't unique in terms of this issue. As members may already be aware, a cross-departmental water quality steering group is already in the process of drafting a set of evidence-based recommendations to tackle blue-green algae in Lough Neagh and secure longer-term improvements in water quality, and Patsy McGlone referenced that. The recommendations within the report are underpinned by scientific evidence and data, and I think it's important we do that. DAERA also established an independent science advisory group. The membership of the group has been drawn initially from scientific expertise of the devolved administrations, with a remit to provide an advisory and independent scrutiny role to the report. I'm expecting to receive the report and recommendations for action from officials imminently. We're talking weeks, not months here. As members will no doubt be aware, key recommendations will look to target the high nutrient levels that emanate from 3 main sources, and we've talked about those. There is research in terms of how they contribute overall in Northern Ireland, but there's also research being undertaken specific to Lough Neagh by AFBI, and hopefully be able to publish that in the time ahead. Whilst in the longer term we need to tackle the ultimate causes of the algae blooms, we need also to be able to ensure that don't reoccur this year and in subsequent years. As you can imagine, given the huge media interest in Lough Neagh during 2023, numerous individuals and companies have contacted my department with potential technical solutions, and we are exploring those. Some may be runners, some may not. I can confirm it is my intention to establish an interagency water body engaging all interested public and stakeholder bodies in the improvement of water quality as part of the Lough Neagh report. My officials have recently held preliminary discussions with the Northern Ireland Local Government Association, and we're also exploring how we can work in partnership with them. Alongside this work, an interagency monitoring group under the leadership of DAERA, involving NIEA, the Drinking Water Inspectorate, AFBI, Public Health Agency, Food Standards Agency and NI Water, is developing a protocol for the future monitoring and management of blooms. I understand Northern Ireland Water has already instigated a dedicated incident management team in terms of how to respond to this. In closing, I welcome today's motion and calls for the establishment of a cross-departmental body, including non-governmental organisations, to address blue-green algae and water quality issues facing Lough Neagh. I believe that we can effectively build upon examples such as in the Mournes and the Forever Mournes Partnership, so we can map a course forward in relation to this. We all share the same aim to preserve and restore the ecological integrity of Lough Neagh in a sustainable and collaborative manner, in a timely manner also, whilst also recognising that this is a long-term process we are embarking upon. I thank members for bringing this motion and for this interesting and challenging discussion which the debate has stimulated. I look forward to working with members on this vital topic in the coming months and years ahead. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Just slightly over your time there, but it's very, very well timed. I call Mr. Owen Tennyson to wind on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and as the grandson of fishermen on both sides of my family and as someone who still lives just a few hundred metres from the loch shore, this is an issue which lies particularly close to my heart, as other members have said. Lough Neagh is the jewel in the crown of our natural environment. It's steeped in rich heritage and is essential for biodiversity, fishing, tourism, recreation and leisure, and provides clean water for drinking, for industry and for agriculture. That such a vital asset has been permitted to start to die in plain sight is a sorry indictment on our politics. The algal blooms which engulfed Lough Neagh last summer have brought this unfolding environmental disaster into sharp public focus, but its roots lie far deeper than that. Whilst this motion today is welcome, and I thank Mr McGuigan for bringing it forward, the motion does not absolve parties in this chamber of their responsibilities in terms of walking us to this position. Be it the industrialisation which was pursued by the now First Minister, or the capping of fines for repeat polluters tabled by the DUP, the challenges apparent in Lough Neagh now are a result of decades of inertia and neglect. Yes?
An MLA at the time, but would he agree with me that that going for growth strategy that I believe his party signed up to was an incorrect strategy? It actually led to the growth of pollution in the loch, and would he encourage and support those who say we need to move away from that strategy going forward? Would he agree with that sentiment?
I think it's a matter of public record that industrialisation has contributed to the challenges we now face. I mean, the member will appreciate I wasn't a member of this assembly at the time, and also policing and justice was just being devolved around that stage. So I thank him for his intervention. However, just last month, Mr Speaker, despite all parties having expressed concern for the ecological crisis unfolding in Lough Neagh, a number of councillors in my constituency shamefully overturned an officer recommendation and permitted extension to landfill just a few hundred metres from the loch shore. It is clear on that basis, Mr Speaker, that inertia still pervades some elements of our politics. Is it any wonder that Northern Ireland is the 12th worst region in the world for biodiversity loss and that none of our waterways meet basic standards? Although having said all of that, Mr Speaker, I hope that today and the apparent change in attitude that is on display in this chamber can now be reflected in a significant change in approach from right across the Executive, this Assembly and beyond. As set out in the Alliance Party's 5-point plan to rescue Lough Neagh, it is vital that we introduce an integrated management plan. At present, there are a myriad of government bodies, councils and charities, all with some degree of responsibility for management of the loch. Too often, however, their work is fragmented and disjointed. We must ensure a new approach to governance and cooperation between these bodies with a shared focus on protection of the loch and its shores. Crucially, Mr Speaker, that work must also be overseen by the long overdue establishment of an independent environmental protection agency with the authority and the autonomy to hold government to account. And Mr Speaker, I welcome the Minister's strong commitment in that regard this afternoon. I will remind all members in this chamber that an independent EPA was agreed in New Decade New Approach. Given the scale of this crisis, we must all recommit ourselves to the establishment of that agency alongside an environment strategy for Northern Ireland. We must work with our agricultural sector, invest in innovation and science to reduce agricultural runoff and its impacts, to support upgrades to septic tanks and promote measures to support nature-friendly farming practices which can produce high-quality food whilst also tackling the wildlife and climate crisis. So too must we confront our creaking wastewater infrastructure, as referred to by Mr McReynolds. Underinvestment means that now there are 100 areas of wastewater treatment which are at or near full capacity, contributing to environmentally damaging overflows. There must now be a serious review of NI Water to ensure it is sustainable, it can safeguard our environment and that it can provide value for money for our citizens. Mr Speaker, as others have outlined, the challenges are huge. They are not, however, insurmountable. Whilst it may take up to 50 years to undo the damage which has festered in Lough Neagh, it will take even longer if we do not start now. I sincerely hope that we can work together to take the necessary long-term decisions to protect the loch, its shores and the communities who love and rely upon it. Thank you.
Okay, call Declan Kearney to wind on the motion.
Ní ceist regionach é seo a bhain, ach ceist náisiúnta atá géist. Ceann Comhairle, almost 2 years ago in early spring, I stood in the field off the Craigan Road, and what was remarkable was the fact that there were no flies in the field. And this was not much more than 600-700 yards away from the shoreline. It was apparent to me that something very, very abnormal was happening at that point in time. And I walked up the road and went into the home of a fisherman friend, and he confirmed to me that there had been no flies, no midges on the loch. That the water column of the loch, as far away as 2 years ago, was absolutely crystal clear, and that this had never been seen for 2-3 generations. And in the same period, dogs died on the loch shore at Rayswood, just around the shoreline above Antrim town. And there was no explanation provided at that time for the death of the animals. But again, it was clear there was a correlation to what was happening in the loch, and there was something profoundly abnormal happening. Ceann Comhairle, the crisis in Lough Neagh did not happen last year. This has been building as an ecological catastrophe for a significant period. And what happened last spring and last summer is simply the culmination of a perfect storm. A perfect storm of multifactorial conditions. Lough Neagh is not just a place of great beauty and is not only a national treasure. It is something which cherishes and is a home to a fantastic biodiversity. And at this point in time, that biodiversity and the natural habitat of the loch is being directly challenged. and the work that has been done to repopulate the shore with the curlew species, that is now being threatened as a direct consequence of what is happening. But much more than that, many fishermen depend on Lough Neagh for their livelihood. And last year, the eel fishing season, which should have lasted 6 months, was reduced to 2 months. And that is the human reality of now what we are contending with. There are multiple factors which have given rise to this catastrophe, and there are multiple consequences. So a whole of government approach is required. The lack of investment in wastewater treatment is a contributory factor to what is happening. In my constituency at Cranfield, just fields away from the shoreline, the wastewater treatment infrastructure does not have the capacity to serve the growing population in the Cregan hamlet. So an urgent reset is required. We need a coordinated policy intervention, and we need to see, as proposed in the motion, an interdepartmental action plan. Lough Neagh must now become for our Assembly an environmental, ecological, infrastructural and an economic priority going forward. So I welcome warmly the cross-party interventions that have been made by colleagues here today. Ní mór doing, smacht a chur an tubastja e ceolaíoch seo. Agus gom sa buach le ahan bwal a glach parcha and St. Gisbrach seo inniu. I very much welcome the contributions by colleagues right across the House. The Alliance Party amendment is very welcome. I agree with the need for how we introduce tighter sanctions for those who are polluting the loch. And we need to see processing interventions introduced in relation to how feedstuffs are produced and how fertilisers are developed. The DUP colleagues questioned some of the scientific analysis, but I appreciate the fact that overall they acknowledge the need for there to be cross-party engagement and intervention on this issue. And the colleagues from the UUP spoke about the need for accountability and also concurred with the need for greater coordination. The SDLP colleagues spoke about the need for interdepartmental focus and also reiterated the multifactorial roots of this particular crisis, and a contributor from my own party re-emphasised the importance of public ownership as a priority for how we proceed. And in conclusion, other Alliance colleagues then spoke of the economic repercussions that flow from this ecological catastrophe and the need for an integrated management plan. To the new Minister, I commend your ambition in planning to lap the loch in August, but more seriously, Minister, I genuinely commend and welcome your solution-focused remarks in response to today's debate. I would like to say to you that over the course of several months now, I've had the pleasure of working directly with NIEA and DAERA officials, alongside myself and other stakeholders associated with the loch. We had meetings in Tunbridge in September, and then follow-up meetings in late December. And those were meetings with NIEA, DAERA officials, and also a number of stakeholders who came together with myself, local fishermen, anglers, other residents of the loch, people who own land around the loch. And we will be sharing proposals with the NIEA and DAERA officials who attended that meeting in the coming period at a follow-up meeting very shortly, and I trust that those views will be shared directly with your own private office. Minister, it is essential that democratic consultation and partnership now characterise how we move forward. That's democratic consultation and partnership with the Lough Shore community. The experience and views of fisher families, of residents, community groups, non-governmental organisations such as the Lough Neagh Partnership must be heard, and they must be taken on board as we formulate the type of interventions that are now urgently required. I would also say to the House, saving Lough Neagh must be above party politics in this chamber. We need an all-of-party and a cross-governmental approach to how we get on top of this catastrophe. In conclusion, we require an all-of-government approach. As I said, we require an all-of and cross-party approach to how we move forward. To the Minister present and to other ministers in the Executive, we require investment. We need a joined-up strategy and action plan, and that must be founded upon local partnership with the people who live by the loch and who rely upon the loch for their livelihoods. A new approach is required for how we rescue and protect Lough Neagh into the future, and that is to be found through the mechanism, ultimately, of public ownership.
That brings to a conclusion the debate. So we move to the question. The question is that the amendment standing in the name of John Blair, David Honeyford, Owen Tennyson, George Eastwood, Peter McReynolds and Sean Mulholland be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, if any, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the motion as amended be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, if any, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. If members would take their ease for a moment, and we're going to change the table for the next debate.